Hi, everyone. Welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. This is your chance to learn from the experts, share cultivation tips, and network with other growers in this exciting industry. My name is Keisha. I'll be your moderator for today's session. A couple of reminders before we get started. While office hours isn't the time to ask things like, will regulations in my state allow me to legally do X? Or what does AROYA cost? Although if you book a demo, we'd love to talk to you about that. AROYA office hours is the time to ask things like, what are some ways to grow from manual growing to crop steering with hardware and software? And this is the data I'm seeing with my grow. Can you help me understand what it means? So for everyone who's joining us today, please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat at any time. And if your question is selected, we'll have you unmute and ask away. And Scott and Seth, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Keisha. Really excited today to have Cy Scott with us, who is the CEO of Headset. Sky, the uh, Headset platform is a really interesting place to get data about the cannabis industry. I was at an industry conference called Trailblazers a number of months ago and met Cy for the first time. And was really interested in what Headset was doing and had seen them in the news quite a bit. Whenever you see a news story about the cannabis industry and its growth and the trends in certain states, a lot of times you'll see Headset referred to as its primary source of data about the industry. And as Cy and I started talking with each other, we saw that there's a need amongst growers to have better access to data about what's happening with different strains and products in the States. And the reason that I've noticed this is that in talking to growers, and with AROYA being a platform that's principally used by growers, I see a big need for them to be able to participate in conversations with sales and with strategic leaders in the business about what strains should we be growing and why. And doing this without data is basically like flying blind. So, and Cy is not just the CEO of Headset, but he's also was one of the founders of Leafly. So he has a great background in the industry. And so welcome, Cy. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Scott. Really happy to be here, and thanks for the introduction there. Yeah, absolutely. I guess a quick bit on my background. Started in the cannabis industry. I think it's about 11 years, maybe going to be going on 12 pretty soon here, with the founding of Leafly. And during our time there, really saw an opportunity on the data side and helping organizations like yourselves be able to navigate what was going on in the cannabis space to make, smarter decisions and ultimately be more successful. And, if we can help organizations like you be more successful, then ultimately we feel like this industry will be successful. And that's what we all want to see. So we set out to tackle this problem with Headset. And I did bring some data today. So I'm going to walk everyone through that. Let me share my screen here and get over the presentation. Okay. You guys can probably see that.
Yep.
I can't really. Okay, great.
Yep.
Because I can't see you guys here.
Yeah.
Cool.
The
So,
joys of Google Meet. Yeah.
exactly. So let me tell you a little bit about Headset, and then what I thought I would do is I'll talk you through some larger macro trends about the industry and like market sizing. And I'm not sure where everyone is watching this from. This is it's a large industry, and there's a lot of different regions, and so kind of talk about high level trends. And I think that's just nice to know. If you're in one of these markets, what's going on, where the opportunity is within the markets and so on. And then I'll go into, a little more granular data on the flower category in particular, given, the grower audience. But I know probably a lot of, you growers are growing products that will end up as a flower product on a store shelf, but may end up in a vapor pen or a pre-roll or what have you. But I brought a fair amount of flower data, but we certainly have data on every category. So the way Headset works, we like to think about ourselves as providing this roadmap to ultimately succeed in a complex vertical. It's changing so fast. There's so many dynamics happening. There's new brands coming to market, new legislative changes, new strains that are trending, pricing challenges that happen, and just to kind of really understanding what's going on is critical to ultimately, outcompete in this space. So we provide a couple different services. Today we'll be talking a lot about the market intelligence. That's basically looking at all the data and what's going on in the market. So intelligence on the market. Business intelligence is more for our retailer and dispensary audience, and this is where we source our data. So we work directly with retailers and dispensaries. We connect to over 2,500 different dispensaries across the US and in Canada. And we connect at their point of sale level. So we see pretty much everything that goes on in those businesses. We see transaction and sales information. We see things like inventory carry. We see things like consumer data, who's purchasing these products and what types of products are they purchasing. So we provide insight back to the dispensaries and retailers so they can understand their business and really how to optimize, their dispensary operation. And then we take all this data and we aggregate it, we normalize it, we make sense of it, and we provide that in our market intelligence tool. And that's going to power a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today. And a lot of our clients have are looking to answer this big question ultimately, like what is working in the cannabis industry, whether you're an investor, whether you're a product manufacturer, a grower. This is the question we all want to know, and the answer is always changing, I think.
Mhm.
So let's start with macro industry trends before we kind of dive a little bit more granular. So I think this is nice to know. It's a big industry, a $36 billion industry this year. And this is growing quite a bit from last year. You can see that kind of green color is the US and the purple is Canada. Obviously, the US certainly outperforms Canada. The Canadian population is about the population of California. And so, kind of makes sense. But, Canada is a federally legal country versus, here in the US. But good numbers, big numbers. And in fact, we have 10 $1 billion plus markets, and some are multi-billion dollar markets like California. But this is also a pretty big milestone. And you'll see some, states that have been around for some time, like Washington, Colorado, but you'll see some emerging markets here as well, markets like Illinois and Michigan that we consider emerging because they are still working through licenses. I think there's license constraints in markets like Illinois still today. And so those will continue to grow and be larger. But as of December of last year, 10 $1 billion markets. But by 2025, we expect 16 $1 billion markets. So you'll see some new names coming through here as they grow, like New Jersey and New York, obviously, with their populations. We should expect to see some sizable revenues coming from there, but also markets like Oklahoma cracking the $1 billion threshold. Well, these are big numbers and these are good. It's good to just kind of understand the total market opportunity that you have if you captured the whole market. And some markets are certainly growing faster than others. There is a lot of chatter out there about, are we in a kind of a slowing growth phase, or are the markets slowing down? And that could be true depending on where you're at. Like if you're sitting in Washington State, where I'm in here in Seattle, growth isn't as strong as it was in the earlier years, but it is certainly still growing. But you contrast that with markets like Michigan, where you're really seeing, almost 100% growth. In Illinois, same thing. Arizona, same thing. So there are a lot of markets that are showing very, very strong growth. And then the more mature markets are growing a little bit more slowly. And I think that there's still plenty of efficiencies and room to accelerate that. There's a lot of changes that can happen in places like Washington State where there is no delivery. For example, no on-premise consumption. There's a lot of ways that the state can invest to continue to show more growth, because I don't think we've necessarily hit the consumer ceiling quite yet. Canada is smaller scale, but it is climbing. Ontario is a good example of that. It's that blue line at the top. This is all about access, and you'll probably hear this a lot if you're in a market like California, competing pretty heavily with the illicit market. And a lot of that has to do with access. Consumers really can't go to a dispensary or a retailer in many populated areas just because of limitations. And even if you can, usually those dispensaries or retailers are over out by an airport or something, hard to access, not on Main Street. So there is a lot of constraint limitations. And in Canada, we see this pretty strongly because Ontario was very limited on the licenses. And Ontario in Canada is about 45% of the Canadian population was there. And when it opened up, it was all provincial run. And then they had a few stores. It was just a handful of stores. And now they've just opened up licensing and sales continue to climb. So licensing really does constrain access. And here's the, same data, just kind of a different way to look at it. First half of 2020 versus the first half of 2021, you can see Ontario growing. And this is a market that had been around for a number of years, legal, I think post 2018. Another trend, macro trend, is that in the emerging markets, so these faster growing markets, basket sizes are declining. So a basket is that transaction, when you're at the checkout. So you'll notice that they are declining across these different markets. And this is as a percentage basis. You see upwards of negative 10, 15% on the basket decline. But the good news is growing transaction count. So more people are purchasing cannabis. And a lot of reasons why baskets are declining is price pressure, competition, supply and demand, all of those things kind of begin to drive the price down. And so, the actual transaction that the consumer is doing gets smaller, but at the same time, more consumers are doing more transactions or coming back more often. And so that ultimately drives up the sales in those markets. And then in what we consider kind of unlimited license markets like Oregon, Washington, I mean, they're not technically unlimited, but you can start to see price stabilization long term compared to markets like Pennsylvania, where an average item price is pretty hefty. We normally see that in medical markets anyways. And if you're in a medical market operating, you probably are commanding a significant premium versus maybe some of the more competitive adult use markets. But this stuff will all balance out over time. And, we expect Pennsylvania, once it does go adult use, whenever that may be, will start to look a lot more like maybe Massachusetts or California. Maybe not Washington, Oregon, the jury's out. We'll see there. But those markets do have some of the lowest prices out there. So just as far as macro trends, emerging markets definitely have strong growth rates. The mature markets are hitting saturation, but there are new ways to drive more opportunity. And this is where, we all try and, talk to our state agencies and talk about what can we do to continue to drive this industry forward. They obviously, the legislative bodies have interest in this. They want to support business. Obviously, there's benefits to tax revenue and all of that. So they should want to see these markets to continue to grow. And it really comes down to access. Like the more retailers, the more dispensary outlets there are, the more sales we've seen. And we don't think we've seen like the ceiling in any market in particular. So now I want to just kind of take a deeper dive look into the flower category at retail. And so, when I say again flower, I mean literally like packaged flower or bulk flower, however you're buying it, but flower, not necessarily pre-roll, not necessarily other categories, although there is maybe some of that data in here, but really just kind of a look at flower at the retail level. So here's a look at category growth from 2020 versus 2021, and then year over year growth percentages. And in the middle there is flower. So, we all know flower, it commands the largest market share in cannabis. Most people associate flower with the cannabis category, and here they are, representing that. And this data is looking at an aggregate of California, Colorado, Washington, Nevada, Oregon, and Michigan. So just kind of a sample of states that we're in. So not comprehensive of every market in the US, but in those states, this is what you're seeing. And there's a bit of emerging markets and a bit of, mature markets in this data set. But you'll see that flower actually grew from a dollar perspective the most, had about $60 million in sales growth from 2020 to 2021. But as a category, or as a percentage of growth, I should say, it's only 12%. Now, something to remember when you're looking at data like this, when you have big numbers, movement, it's hard to have big swings. When you look at something like the beverage category that went from $100 million in sales to $145 million in sales, I mean, it's a very small number compared to what we're seeing in the billion-dollar range in flower. It's beverage swings 45%. So when you look at flower there, it takes a lot to kind of move the needle. So it is still like showing the most growth, and I think that should say 600 million, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, wanted to point out that flower is very, very important category. While the growth may be slowing, it still has the highest dollar growth out there. Now that's all tempered with, losing market share to other categories. And this is just when you think about percentage of dollar sales that go to these different categories, vapor pens, edibles, and so on, flower is losing some market share, going from, in early days of 2020, which was, a long, long time ago, to basically the end of last year, a fair amount of market share, depending on the market. Now, Canada is kind of a unique one because it was a merging market in 2020, and in 2020, the beginning of 2020, they had no other formats or no notable formats like edibles. Vapor pens weren't available for sale yet, so those didn't come into the market till probably about February 2020, which is why you see that kind of decline. A little different in the US, where different categories have been available since the beginning. So you see it's kind of fluctuating. US is at about 40%, and it kind of went up to almost 50% and back down kind of during those early days of the pandemic. So it is losing a little bit of market share to other categories, but it seems to be kind of holding its own, between 40 and 45%, I would say. And frankly, I would have thought it would lose a bit more market share than it has. It seems to be just a really resilient category. The reason I say that is just new consumers coming in, maybe not with a lot of experience around cannabis, and having all these other formats, things like edibles, vapor pens available to them. That the consumption method may be a little simpler because you don't have to, have a device to consume it, or you don't have to, grind it up, or know how to, roll a pre-roll and so on. But it is, hanging in there. And I think a big reason for that is when we look at these core consumers, um, the top 10% of flower customers account for 60% of sales. So you have these really strong consumers, this core consumer. And this graph that we're looking at here is US and Canada, kind of blue versus this red. And this is quarter over quarter median flower spend. So you see the median flower spend in the US from the tail end of 2019 to the tail end of 2021. It kind of climbed and kind of declined again. Again, this is looking at aggregate. Sometimes that has to do with new markets opening up. Again, back to that kind of pricing, the average item price, in these emerging markets is a little higher, and then supply demand, and it kind of starts to stabilize. But you can still see it. It's a fair amount on a median flower spend. And these top 10 customers are driving a lot of sales. And so it's just really important to just be mindful of. You really want to attract this audience as a brand, as an organization. If you can find the products and the strains or whatever you're producing that resonates with that audience, you're going to create a lot of sales just based on these behaviors of this core consumer.
Hey,
And
Sai,
then, yeah,
a quick question, a follow-on question on that. Do that top 10%, are they more, for lack of a better term, brand loyal? They seem to be buying in higher volumes, and they're buying a lot of flower. Are they loyal to brands or strains? Is any of the data indicate that?
that's a good question. I don't have that in front of me. We do see that like there's like retail loyalty, like your core customers that come into your dispensary are the ones that are driving a lot of your revenue.
Right.
And we have different categories of consumers that we label, like your champions, your loyalists, and so on. And they do drive a lot. Now, I don't know if it's, strain specific or brand specific. But we can, maybe look and see if we have any of that data, because we do have some brand loyalty information. But I think, you could imagine that most likely they would be if you can capture them.
Yeah.
But certainly from like a retail dispensary, like a small percentage of purchasers are driving a disproportionately large amount of
Yeah.
your revenue. So I would imagine that would apply to brands and strains as well.
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's a really critical point for growers to think about is how to, what they can do in terms of products to or selecting the right cultivars to make that loyalty and make those customers sticky. So anyway, sorry, keep
Exactly.
yeah.
It's a great call out, Scott. And when we look at flower on a demographic basis, so you'll see here that from a wallet share, so assuming, Generation X individuals spending a certain $100 on cannabis, well, 41 of those dollars are going to flower, 21 dollars are going to vapor pens. You'll notice that with the older generation, a larger percentage of sales are going to flower, and that's different than the younger consumer, the Generation Z. That's 30% in vapor pens, 11% in concentrate. Generation Z, fastest growing generation in cannabis sales. They are turning 21 every day. So, today, a bunch of new Generation Z members are turning 21 and going to purchase cannabis legally for the first time. And that will continue to happen for years. There's Generation Z, I think, is about 3 years of legal age, 21, 22, 23, maybe 24-year-olds at this point. So it's certainly growing. Now, Generation Z doesn't have as much purchasing power. They're younger. Um, their share of wallet that they can spend on cannabis is just generally smaller than an older generation that might have more money to spend on things like cannabis. So, something to be mindful of. But it is an interesting trend to see. Now, we'll see if the Generation Z, as they age into these other kind of categories, where a millennial is today or where a Generation X member might be today, do they change their purchase behavior? Like, do they move away from vapor pens? Do they move into other categories? Certainly, we see with like baby boomers, you'll see tinctures, sublinguals, are taking in topicals as well, take a disproportionate share there. And I think that, makes a lot of sense when you're getting older. People are looking for alternatives for pain management. So they're trying tinctures or they're trying topicals. Maybe less relevant for a younger audience today. So these numbers may change as this generation gets older. We may see things like, maybe they consume less concentrates because they're not looking for that really strong potency as they get older. Or maybe they do continue with that trend. So this is something that we'll certainly be watching, but just something to be mindful of when we think about the flower category. If that trend holds, they are buying less flower, although it is still the largest category spend, although vapor pens is definitely catching up there. And this is kind of to those loyal customers. When we look at a store by store basis, you'll see that 16% of its customers with at least 10 trips are driving over 2/3 of revenue for these stores. So this is at a store level. But again, this kind of points to that loyalty and like attracting that audience. I mean, these are the people that you want to get in front of. There's a lot of people that come in for one trip. This one trip, 40% of sales or visits, I should say, or one trippers to a store, but they only attribute to 7% of sales. So they might, come in, might buy, a handful of things, but not come back. And so they're not really, representing the dollar sales amount. But these people that are coming back 10 plus times over the last 6 months, that's who you want. And so those are the same people that you want to be purchasing your products and attracting that audience. Kind of back on the pricing. So flower program pricing is getting compressed in a lot of markets. And I'm sure everyone has heard this or experienced this, in their markets. There's, all sorts of chatter about, markets like California, outdoor grow, last year, and wholesale price and all of that. But this is on an average price per gram. This is before tax, after discounts across these sample of markets, which includes Canadian market in there, a couple of Canadian markets, Alberta and Ontario, but you're looking at California, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And you'll see Pennsylvania has that large price power. Again, it's limited license market, medical, that won't last forever as that market starts to develop into more of like an adult use market. But you can see kind of this similar trend here where there is just some price compression happening in flower. Now I want to talk briefly on some strain trends that we see, and we've got some pretty good strain data. So this is looking at month over month strain sales increase for the top 20 strains. So across I could have done a better job pulling this graphic together, but across the bottom there from left to right, is all put into a pool. And so if you're in a specific state, this top 20 will probably look different. But just kind of give you a sense of just generalized trends. Sometimes we've seen things in other markets that are trending, and then you can bring those to your market and capture some market share. So here you can see like wedding cake, which has been long number one in a lot of markets. on its own, but in aggregate, still number one, but losing month over month strain sales. Like it's just declining. And Kush Mints, the number two there, is really showing some real strong growth month over month. And when I was pulling some of this data, the year over year was like well over 100% growth. So you're seeing some growth there. The sativa dominant, kind of ignore that. Sometimes house brands, they're not putting in strain data, or they're just calling it sativa dominant. So, those sativa dominant, indica dominant, they make sense when there's just a lot of those products out there when people aren't talking strain specific within flower. Um, but beyond that, you can see some other kind of trending strains, Super Lemon Haze, which is a classic. It's kind of interesting to see that because that's been around forever, but still doing well. Same thing with Blue Dream, but Biscotti, Kush Cake, um, somewhat Durban Poison, but Kush Mints. Those are the ones that are really moving pretty quickly here. So take a look. This is the top 20. Obviously we've got track hundreds, if not thousands, of different strains, but these are the ones that command the most market share right now across those markets I mentioned. So I thought it would be worth highlighting. And then I wanted to look at just a snapshot of California. This is the top 15 strains in California right now um, by distinct brands that sell those strains. And so that means, the number of brands that are producing wedding cake is about 90 different brands. And when I say brands, it's, what a consumer might consider a brand, cultivar, whoever it may be on the packaging. So wedding cake, 90, ice cream cake, roughly the same. You can see things like cereal milk, smaller number, Alien OG, smaller number, all the way down to 805 glue, which is only one. There's one brand that produces 805 glue. I believe it's Pacific Stone out of California, but it's still in the top 15. So there's different strategies you can play here. You can look to strains like Super Silver Haze, or create your own, like the 805 glue, kind of brand your own and try and build that up as its own kind of distinct brand, so much as a strain can be a brand. Like Kush Mints, with that growth here, you can see that it's still sold by less than the wedding cake and the ice cream cake. Even though wedding cake is losing market share, it's still produced by a lot more organizations than Kush Mints, and Kush Mints is um, gaining ground, right? So watching for trends like this and getting ahead of trends like this, like getting in front of Kush Mints might be a good idea now, but there's probably other things on this list that you could get in front of even sooner, with just the grow life cycle to capture that kind of momentum that some of these strains might have. And then flower sales by package size, and this is based on total revenue, again aggregated. Maybe no surprises here, but you can see that the 8s, the 3.5 grams, are really drivers of sales. Almost 50% of sales are going to 3.5 gram package size. That's where the consumers are at. That's what they're purchasing. Beyond that, number two would be bulk. So that's just bulk. Also, is 28 grams bulk. Sometimes bulk, it's just a higher priced product too. So maybe selling a few less units, but because it's priced so high, it does pretty well. And you can see things like single gram, revenue. It's not really much of a contributor to revenue. They don't move that much compared to some of these other package sizes. And then finally, this is kind of, I don't have any numbers to back up this THCV comment, but in a recent industry report, we did talk about this. We're starting to see, this, and THCV has been around in the conversation for as long as I've been in the conversation. I mean, it goes way, way back. But you're starting to see more of this. You're seeing like brands like Wana, throwing it on the labels for their edible packaging. I think as consumers start to be aware of it, just like, CBD long ago, CBN, CBG, more recently, things like THC, sometimes, or THCV, sometimes, get some momentum and can be somewhat trendy. So just something to kind of pay attention to as we're starting to see more interest in certain cannabinoids like THCV out there. So the big takeaway here, the flower category is still the largest category, still growing the most, but it is losing market share to other categories. Younger generations are moving towards other formats right now. Will that hold? Possibly. Maybe they develop some some patterns of behavior where they stick with vapor pens, they stick with concentrates more than they do, flower, or maybe as they age, they start to look like other generations. Core consumer, it really is where the revenue is at, and really finding that consumer is critical. And strains can be trendy. Obviously, there was some in there like Blue Dream, like and Super Lemon Haze, like what's old is new again, I guess, for those guys. But always interesting to kind of watch that, pay attention to that, and see if you can capture that, as they're coming around. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to capture those when not a lot of brands are producing those strains, but consumers are buying them, and then you can, capture that revenue for yourself. So that's it. I know there's a lot in there. There's always so much to cover, and you can slice the data so many different ways. It's always hard to know, what's the most relevant. But happy to share this presentation with everybody, and answer any questions anybody might have.
Thanks, Sai. That's really fascinating, and I think for growers, being part of the conversation and looking specifically at which strains they're producing, how they're yielding on each of those strains, and then looking at what's happening in the market could identify ways to grow that they're really not thinking about today. And specifically, I was wondering from Seth, were any of the strains on the list in terms of size? So I think what you said, Sai, was that that from left to right, those are the biggest term ones in volume, going to the smallest to the right, and then their growth rates were shown on the y-axis. Were any of those surprising to you? Any surprises on that list?
Mostly the Super Lemon Haze, honestly.
Okay.
Some of the old classics. I can't hardly find that in Washington to save my life. I was looking.
Okay.
Like a seasonal thing around here, at least.
Sure.
There's like one farm that produces it in Eastern Washington that I know of, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, so what about, are there any strains on that list that are known to be big yielders? Like Runts, I know, has a reputation as being I think has a reputation as being a good yielder. What about Wedding Cake? Seeing it that high on the list, is that, I mean, it apparently lots of people are making it, lots of people are buying it. So how should a grower think about a strain like that?
Well, I think you nailed it with Wedding Cake there. It is a good yielder.
Okay.
That's a big part of it. It's not very hard to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Certain people definitely have had their own struggles with it, just like any other strain, but overall it's a good yielder, easy to grow, and popular. So I think there's been a lot of interest among growers to produce a lot of it and push it.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, it's not, you get some of the diesels and other things that kind of push into the more boutique territories. Wedding Cake has a good overall mass appeal. It tests good. It's got good jar appeal. It kind of just checks all the boxes for a grower. There's a lot of other stuff that you can grow that's, definitely more difficult. But at the end of the day, as growers, we do want to push strains that yield for us, right? I mean, you've either got to push that strain that yields for you, or charge a premium for your square footage to grow this harder to grow strain. And so where the market's going, that I've noticed, is not necessarily, I mean, everyone's trying to find that balance between quality and yield, and those aren't at all mutually exclusive, but also finding that strain that really checks the box for those different terpene profiles that you want, and then figuring out how to grow it.
Yeah, sure. And so I'm wondering, Sai, is there any, because you did show there how the different strains are growing in terms of popularity. Is there a way to zoom in and look at price trends? Because I think, that popularity will contribute to what price you're able to get in the marketplace. And if you can get ahead of that and say, well, I'm actually really good at growing this strain. It yields well, and I know the price is increasing. Is that a good combination, do you think, for growers?
Yeah, I think I definitely looking at price trends at the strain level, just from a competitive landscape as well. I mean, we track retail, what's happening at retail, and we know the wholesale price into retail, but it is good to know if you are producing and selling at retail, like what are you up against, who are you competing against, and how does pricing play into that? Because anecdotally, I think price is still a big part of the conversation, when people are shopping and they're looking at testing and they see a couple brands, and maybe, you know, brand loyalty, we are starting to see for certain brands out there, like where they are generating repeat purchase behaviors on the consumer side. But there are a lot of flower brands, right? It can be quite overwhelming depending on where you're at. And so if you're at a shop and, you know, people are new to the category and they see two brands, and then they will start to look at pricing as kind of a differentiator. Obviously it's not as simple as that. You know, you've got the bud tender and the conversation happening, and you know, the look and smell and everything that you can, you know, maybe, you know, access at the point of purchase, depending on what market you're in, will drive that too. But pricing for sure is a big deal. And like watching that and then working back from that, right? And saying, okay, I need to get my price here at the retail level, and knowing that retailers like to have, you know, 50% margins on these things. So I need to come in at this price, and then kind of working all the way back into like your grow and what can you afford to meet that price to get to market and then to capture those consumers, I think is a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really well said. How, from also from your perspective, you know, from as an operator's perspective, Seth, do you think that, you know, growers are always taking in new strains, and sometimes that pressure comes from sales. I've heard it's like, well, I got to have this new stuff, you know, let's get something different out there. But you know, if they haven't grown it before, that first run probably isn't going to yield that well. How should growers think about, you know, looking at some of the headset data to say, this is the trend, these are trends that are coming, let's get ahead of it, versus like, it's going to be rough the first couple of times I grow this, and getting through those, you know, it might take 5 or 6 months to get through the first couple of harvests. How should growers think about that?
Well, you know, there's a few ways to look at that. I think number one, you've got to, you know, just do a really good risk benefit analysis. Okay, I'm going to do this. How hard am I going to go into that? For some growers, if I've got 15 500 square foot rooms, that's a whole different proposition. I can take one room and really focus on that and slowly step it up. Otherwise, looking at something like Headset, where you can start to analyze some of these trends, you can start to think about, okay, do I really need to keep 120 mothers at my facility? You know, 40 of these haven't been popular in the marketplace in quite a while. Then we can start to analyze, like, what is the lifespan of a strain, and how often do we need to be changing that? So one thing I've noticed is you find something really popular, like anything with the name glue in it now. Gorilla Glue for a few years was, you know, it got so popular, we had to white label all of it for quite a while, just because there's no point in putting our name on another jar of Gorilla Glue in the store when there's already 15 other brands of it out there.
Sure.
So finding that strain lifespan, and then realizing, like, okay, if I've got a winner, where might my next moves be? Like, do I need to follow the glue train and get like my own proprietary glue line going? Do I need to get some brand recognition based on a wedding cake cross or a cookies cross? I think you've got to find your niche, and still, you know, try new things, see what's coming in. You can't get too static with it. Like, that's right back to the super lemon haze. That was very surprising to see on there. Just because that's been around forever.
Well, and I'm wondering, you know, I don't know if this analogy works at all, Sai, but you know, one of the things I've noticed in cannabis, it's almost like fast fashion. You know, how quickly can you get that new collection at Zara or you know, Uniqlo out there, and you know, and get that retail data, figure out what's working, you know, work that process. I mean, as Seth mentions, you got to start with the mother plants, then you got to get clones, then you got to get them into production, then you got to figure out how to grow it, and it's kind of a long process. Is there anything analogous with this fast fashion, you know, retail data and cannabis retail data?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I've never really thought about it like the fashion, but I can see how strains can be quite fashionable. You know, they can gain a lot of traction quickly. Kind of, you know, sometimes they hang out for a long time, sometimes they drop off. But yeah, I mean, certainly looking at the numbers can help. You know, when you look at a wedding cake, the number of when across those 6 markets I was mentioning, wedding cake is sold by 324 brands. That's a lot of brands, right? And obviously that's not, you know, in a single market, but that's tough, you know. But it wasn't always that way, right? I'm sure it was a handful, and then kind of people piled on, and because there's so many people producing it, there's just like the access is everywhere, drives the numbers up. But some of these more emerging ones are that are moving up the charts. Like I'm looking here, like cereal milk is in the top 15. It's number 13 across those, and it was growing 10% year over year, 6%, but it only has 31 brands producing it right now. And so, you jumping into that and like capturing that, and maybe as more brands do produce it, those sales just go up the line there. So yeah, I think probably has some parallels to things like kind of fashion trends.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Seth, any other things that stand out from the data to you?
Personally, I think it's just cool to see where those trends are going. You can start to see kind of the rise and decline of certain strains and start to decide, okay, as a business, we want to be projecting as close as we can to like 2 years out with our strain choices.
Yeah.
And now we can look at that and go, okay, certain ones we can throw out.
Yeah.
Or you might see a surprise in data like that Super Lemon Haze. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to start looking into Super Lemon Haze crosses.
Yeah.
And pull up something that I haven't dug into for 10 years because it's been, it's made its round. It's coming back around.
Sure. I'm wondering also if there's kind of this magic that can happen between strains that are growing in popularity and ones that you're seeing increases in yield. That you've figured out how to steer that crop and get yield increases. So not only is it increasing in popularity, maybe even increasing in price for certain strains, and you're saying I can get more grams out of it. Is that a good combination?
Yeah, and I think we're with increasing legalization, we're getting there. What's coming down the line in the world of genetics is going to be taking those strains that we love the flavor of, we love the look of, and then probably back crossing in some higher yielders and being able to generationally advance that and pick out from thousands and thousands of plants our perfect one.
Sure.
When we're dealing with most of these plants were popped from 10 or 20 seeds and selected that way.
Yeah.
It's very limited on that variability. Hidden inside that plant's genome might be our perfect example. We just have to go out and find it. And until now, we haven't been able to. So moving forward, we're going to be able to fine tune, as a grower, if you've got something that you want to yield better and sells great, and you've proven it has some market durability, you might be able to take that and say, okay, we're ready to invest money now in making this thing yield, because not only is that better for us, now we can sell that higher yielding delicious strain to other growers. Just like, if you had an apple orchard over the years, you started to get into finding your own crosses.
Sure. Yes.
I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
Being the grower experts, strain naming trends. Like one of the things that, we see in the data is a lot of like trends towards like desserty type things, like obviously the wedding cake and all the cake crosses, the gelatos,
Sure.
The biscottis, the sherbets, cereal milk, and then there's all the Girl Scout cookies, GSC, but now there's obviously, like we're saying, Kush Mints is like Thin Mints. You got Do-si-dos, which I think Leafly rated like the number one for the year is the Do-si-dos strain. There's that Girl Scout cookies kind of thing going on. Is that like, speaking of like fashion trends, is it like a fashionable thing, or are these all kind of crosses from, it's a cake and it kind of crossed, and so they just kind of derivative cake names, and now you got ice cream cake and wedding cake and all these others? Or like, do you think consumers are going in and hearing, Durban Poison is still in the top 20, but to a new consumer, you're like, you can have ice cream cake or you can have Durban Poison. You're like, ice cream cake kind of resonates with me.
Yeah, exactly.
AK-47 in there. There's like 15 years there of really mean strain names, but I think the market's just evolved. Just culturally, things have changed.
Yeah. But, well, I think that's an excellent point. I also, with the strain names, I think maybe somebody can tell me if I'm right on this. I think in California, certain strain names have become illegal because they share names with popular types of candy. Is that right, Keisha? You're in California.
Yeah, you're correct. I actually think Girl Scout cookies might be one. Skittles, I think, is another I've heard.
Yeah.
Just they putting the kibosh on all of that.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not sure. This is maybe trivia. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect the way that it's named in your analytics or not.
Yeah, like Girl Scout cookies, obviously it's like GSC everywhere now. Gorilla Glue, not that it's a candy, but there was that brand. I think Gorilla Glue came after whoever were the original original cultivar of that. And so now it's, GG
Yeah.
for Gorilla Glue.
Yeah.
Yeah, Skittles, Runts, all
Yeah.
those things like I think are too step on brands too much, but obviously there is like this is adult use product in many markets, and you probably don't want to put those brands just from like this is a nascent industry and we don't need any black eyes, and you don't want that news headline. Look at Skittles and Runts and all
Right.
these things that might attract like a younger audience.
Yeah. I do think those names around, sweetness and, it's kind of this organoleptic thing. It's like, just general attractiveness that has led to a lot of those strain names. That's just my opinion, though. So
honestly, Scott, I think it's going to be tough to get away from that for the time being. Just looking at like the nicotine vape market.
Sure.
Like I'm not a nicotine vapor, but the other day I was at the gas station. Someone ahead of me bought a energy drink flavored vape pen. They asked for that specifically, and I was like, wow, that's some interesting marketing. But like, with some of these strains, how are you going to confer that you think it smells like wedding cake unless you say wedding cake?
Sure.
Or cereal milk? I can kind of infer what that's going to smell like, but it's also like, not the classiest for an adult product.
Yeah. So. Well, I have kind of maybe just a I don't know, a procedural question for Cy. If a grower is working at a business that has access to headset, how does that work? Can they just ask for a login to be able to start looking at the data and paw their way through it? Because I went and started looking at things, and there's all sorts of market data that I'd never seen before that was interesting. How does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we have, if you're in an organization that is leveraging headset, you can request a login, get access, and then we're happy to train anybody. We have a great customer success team that works with our clients, because every organization has a variety of members and different roles, and you've got different needs of the data and different ways of looking at the data. And so as a grower specifically, we can definitely train you on, things like package size trends, pricing trends, strain trends that you can find in the data that might be more relevant to you versus, other people in the organization. And, we think it's really great. I mean, it's obviously great when an organization is bought into the headset platform and everyone's looking at the data, but it also, we find like those organizations that do that, it's a nice common language that everyone internally can use as you're talking about things and you're making cases for why you want to budget, for XYZ. You can say, and here's what the data is showing, and, us from a market perspective. And that usually helps with, the upper level, whoever it is that has to approve, some of these large budget outlays, to when you have the numbers to back it up, instead of just like, I think that we should do this because I've heard something. You can show the headset data, and if they're using headset data for other reasons, then you have that common currency amongst the organization. So definitely encourage everyone to do that. And if your organization is not doing it, definitely encourage you guys to check it out. We're happy to give demos and bring more people from your team, whoever it may be. People on the finance team, people on the sales team. There's a lot of ways to slice the data, and they may be interested in what we can offer as well.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear from any other growers out there. Either we'll post this on YouTube as well, either in the comments or anybody that's on today, about that conversation between the the growers and the finance people and sales leadership. Because I was just at a grow a couple of weeks ago, and one of the founders has a favorite strain. He just loves a strain. He wants to have it grown. I don't know if you've seen, he wants to keep the genetics as well. The product, we went and saw it. It's the yields were okay, but super kind of light, schwafy, not super saleable product. And I wonder if I'm just thinking out loud, if growers come with data and like, hey, this is what's happening in the market. Here's how these strains are trending. Strains are trending, and here's what you need to be aware of. That if would change that conversation. You know, if they came in and said, you know, biscotti is really going off right now, I know I can get 45 grams out of it, and we'll be making twice as much money as your favorite strain. I wonder if that would change the conversation. Seth, what do you think?
I think as a grower, yeah, if I can go to, I mean, and it all depends. Like if you've got your owner operators that have those specific genetics and they're willing to leave money on the table just to grow those, that's up to them.
Yeah.
If we're, you know, purely for profit, if I'm a grower coming to investors or anyone managing the company, I can say, look, guys, I want to make these strain changes. Here's some data that shows, like going with, you know, a biscotti cross, for instance, it looks like next year that's going to be a winner. Let's get ahead of the curve. But we can start to identify, you know, even some of those genetic lines that seem to continue to be popular. You know, anything with diesel in it now, you expect a certain gassy, fuely smell. Okay, well, we know that's got certain market potential based on the fact that it's got the name diesel attached to it. And as long as it meets a certain expectation, it's worth putting out there to see if it could take off at the very least.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I really think there is an opportunity to, like you said, with the different strain names or, you know, market trends that are out there. There's an opportunity for growers to bring data into these conversations, just like you were saying, Sai.
Yeah, and you know, we do provide a lot of great data at no cost on our website at headset.io. We're always publishing industry reports. You know, a lot of this stuff that I brought today was from some recent industry reports that we've done. So there's all sorts of ways that we slice the data and kind of generated some narratives, because that can be you know, one of the more challenging things, right? You're looking at all this information, like what is it really telling you? And we have a lot of analysts internally that can help with that. And we publish a lot there. We also have a bestsellers list. It's pretty basic. And we do that because it doesn't cost, you know, anything for the audience, but it's like bestsellers based on number of units by market and by category. So you can go look there. And we update that every day, and you can kind of see as things trend. And so if you look at flower, you can see strains there. You know, these are specific brands, specific strain products as far as the top sellers, but just interesting stuff. So I encourage everyone to take a look. It's at headset.io is the website. And then just at the top there in the navigation, you'll see bestsellers, you'll see resources. And so a lot of that is freely available. And if you're not using Headset currently, when you're ready, we can get you a demo of the full platform to see, because everything we do on our website that we make public is available to our customers as well. We're using the same systems that our customers are to generate these things. So anyways, you can maybe pull down some interesting reports, bring some of that data to the next conversation, whether it's on consumer trends or, you know, category or pricing, whatever it is. You know, that stuff, a lot of that is at no cost on our website.
Yeah, I have noticed that, and props on your user interface as well. It's really good. I feel like growers can bring some insights to the conversation in, you know, and matching that with the market data, because growers know what works. Growers know what yields well and what how things look, or, you know, the nose on a product, for example. They're going to have these insights that are really specific to their area of expertise, and put some data on top of that. It could be really powerful. So I think it's great. Keisha, did we miss anything?
I don't think we did. I actually do have a question. I'm really nerding out as a Gen X flower purchaser in California. But I was also thinking about, you know, we've got, you know, the few cultivators I've interviewed since I've been with the company, you know, they're really passionate about hunt, you know, looking for new phenotypes, you know, really kind of having that space for that creativity. And I was just wondering, like, could they also utilize this data, knowing the top 20 strains? Is that also an opportunity to identify traits where they can start kind of developing some new stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's right there. You know, you look at what's popular, try to determine what is popular about that. And then if you're moving forward, you can say, these are the plants I want to start making crosses with. This is where I think the market's going. This is what, you know, if you can identify, like for some plants, what is that one terpene that really lights off that scent, you know, and how are we going to pass that on to this next generation? Or where do we find it? Like when you say people are pheno hunting, yeah, if you have the space and the passion and you can go grow 100 plants just for that sake, I'm excited for people to start doing that. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to go. You know, they're going to be able to get that plant that grows well for them, has all the traits they want. And Headset's going to help them do it.
Great
Sure.
for medical and adult use markets too, developing cultivars that have particular traits for medical use as well. It's really exciting.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, that was really, that was my one question. Sai, you have any final words for us?
No, just thanks so much for having me. And yeah, feel free to look us up, Headset.io. And I'm on Twitter at Sai_Scott. And yeah, thanks. Love to do it again sometime.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sai.
Awesome to have you, Sai, Scott, and Seth, as usual. So great to see you. What a great conversation. Thanks to all of you for joining us for office hours this week. If you have any questions about AROYA, how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, or any other topic you'd like covered in a future office hours session, please feel free to post it in the chat. Shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com or send us an Instagram DM. We definitely want to hear from you. We record every session. We'll email everyone in attendance a link to the video. Sai, thank you so much also for providing a link to the presentation today. This video will also live on the AROYA YouTube channel, so like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please share with your network and spread the word. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Keisha.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.